So we have Lincoln as the nominee. As the Republican nominee with the Democratic Party so splintered, is the Republican nominee then a shoo-in for president?
The Republican nominee would certainly be the odds-on favorite. But to his credit, remember that Stephen Douglas worked tirelessly after the election to ensure the Union would remain in. So I think there was a lot of patriotism involved here. Not perhaps in some instances not as split on a partisan basis as some of our American politics is today.
So back then, the term rival could also mean friend.
I think that one of the things that turns people off in modern American politics is the nastiness and the bitterness that occurs. Not only were Lincoln and Stephen Douglas political rivals, they were rivals for the romantic interest of Mary Todd.
And we would argue she made the right decision.
I think some would say yes.
And in fact, Douglas died in 1861, shortly after.
He died in the Tremont Hotel in Chicago in June of 1861, apparently worn out and suffering from pneumonia and typhoid. He was a young man. He was only in his 40s.
That's young by my standards.
Yeah, sounds younger all the time, doesn't
it? Sure does. He also lived a hard life. He was known to be a heavy drinker, and he maintained a grueling schedule. Lincoln himself maintained a grueling schedule as well. He was no stranger to hard work. So once he came out of this convention, it was work, and get things ready. Let's go to some of the conventions after 1860. What are some of the highlights of some of the Chicago conventions after the 1860 convention?
Well, if you look at the 1864 convention, which was the Democratic convention, we referred to it in our book as the Copperhead Conspiracy Convention. Democrats convened there, and at that point, Abraham Lincoln was a very unpopular president. The war wasn't going good, but suddenly, of course, the battlefield reverses began to make Abraham Lincoln much more popular. But in 1864, there were reputed plots for the breakout of Confederate prisoners from Camp Douglas in Chicago, and it was reputed that they were going to take over the government of the city and stuff the ballot boxes. And there was a Chicago mayor arrested and charged with treason, and fistfights were breaking out on the floor of the convention. In fact, if we substituted names from the 68 convention chapter to the 64 convention chapter, the script would have been almost the same.
And there would have been Irish policemen protecting things.
Well, there weren't too many cops in those days because Levi Boone got rid of a lot of the Irish Catholic cops when he was mayor. But one of the favorite conventions we had in our book had to do with the 1944 convention. The war is growing to a close. The president is very ill. He's certainly not the vigorous commander-in-chief that he was at the beginning of the war. And I suspect that in the audience tonight there would be not many people who would remember the name of the Vice President of the United States from 1940 to 1944. But as the convention was beginning, the party bosses, Kelly of Chicago and the other big city bosses, couldn't abide the vice president. He was a left-leaner, and they went to Roosevelt and said, we have to have someone else. And Roosevelt pretty much ceded to the big city party bosses. So the real convention in 1944 was at the hotel suite of the then party boss, Hannigan. They decided they needed to find a replacement for, and I'm going to give you his name, it was Henry Wallace. They needed to dump Henry Wallace. But of course, nobody had told the delegates that they were going to dump Wallace. So FDR was nominated by acclamation by the delegates. And so now Henry Wallace comes into the convention hall, which was at the old Chicago Stadium on the west side. As he walks into the hall, the organist begins to play Iowa, Iowa. That's where the tall corn grows. Henry Wallace came from Iowa. And now the convention delegates are all in excited state, and they will, of course, now nominate Henry Wallace by acclamation because he's the sitting vice president, and the party bosses don't know what to do. This was not the plan. We were going to get rid of Henry Wallace. The convention's getting out of control. So Hannigan, the chairman of the party, says to the then mayor, Ed Kelly, mayor of Chicago, what are we going to do? He said, send the sergeant-at-arms all around the stadium and throw open the doors to the convention hall. At that time, that was in the middle of Skid Row in Chicago. Thousands of people were milling around on the outside. They all came pouring into the convention hall. You couldn't find a space on the convention floor. The rafters were mobbed with people. You couldn't move. Whereupon Mayor Kelly summons the fire chief over. He said, shut this place down. It's in violation of the fire code. He goes over to the presiding officer and said, you got to close this place. You're in violation of the fire code. And just as then Senator Claude Pepper was reaching the stage to place the name of Henry Wallace into nomination, the chairman banged the gavel. We're in recess until tomorrow. With that, the chances of Henry Wallace becoming the vice president evaporated. The party bosses got their ducks in order that night, overnight. The next day, Harry Truman was nominated. An obscure senator from Missouri was nominated to be the candidate for vice president. And then, just months after the election, FDR succumbs to a stroke in Hot Springs, and Harry Truman becomes president of the United States. Would Henry Wallace have dropped the bomb? Would Henry Wallace have taken the strong actions that Harry Truman did in those important years of the late 1940s? One doesn't know. But the truth is, but for a fire chief in Chicago, Harry Truman never would have been president.
So once again, some tomfoolery at a Chicago convention changed the course of world history.